Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change. So, is the season should be jolly, or is it? In the sort of profession that I'm pursuing and have been pursuing for a long time, one of the things that I learned very quickly was that this is a season that represents or presents many people with some really serious challenges. For some people, it's a period of grief, remembering those that they've lost. For other people, it's being confronted with what you do when you have really serious conflicts in the family, where the expectation is that we still get together in a jolly way, sharing food and presents and chit-chat. But again, is it really always what it's cracked up to be? Now, I like to think about this period of time as especially important for children and how we think about children and what we do for them. The other part of it is I like to think about this time as a time of reflection. And it's not simply about the material things, which in themselves can bring a lot of pressure on people. It makes it very, very difficult. So, unless you're materially well off, this could be an extraordinarily stressful time. And adding on to that, even if you are materially really, really well off, the emotional and psychological challenges that can come at this point in time, in this so-called festive holiday season, need to be taken into account. So the question that I want to pose to everybody is, how can we make this particular Christmas and holiday season something that we can reflect back on and go, yeah, you know what? Despite the fact that the last 18 months to 2 years, for some of us, it's been very much 2 years where we've struggled with the pandemic, and that's brought with it many, many, many challenges in of itself, let alone holidays. People have been isolated, people have been separated from the loved ones, from friends, from the people at work, our social networks. All those things have had a massive impact as we are coming into this particular holiday season. Now, simply from my point of view, last year was the year that we were in my area completely locked down. Now, I have a great deal of respect and pride in my community up here because we did it really, really well. We locked down hard and we got through, a pretty difficult period of time. And we're still able to do the best that we could in celebrating this holiday season. But what about this year? Again, we're coming out of the sort of restrictions that have been placed on us, from the politicians, but also from common sense. We don't want to prolong this pandemic more and more and more. And so we've recently had to address, a new strain of COVID and the impact that can have on us. Some of us are very anxious about, are we going to get through this holiday period without being locked down? That spectre still hovers over the top of us. So what can we do? Again, I'm going to address this to all of you. What can we do individually and collectively to make this as good as it can be under the circumstances? Because some people are moving into this holiday period having to isolate because they've been exposed. They might have been tested positive. And it is important that we don't just think about ourselves in this period, but that we consider others and our community's well-being. One of the things that's always concerned me about the well-being movement is that it's an extraordinarily individualistic way of looking at being. I was listening to an author, and I can't remember his name because it was in the car. I didn't have any opportunity to take out a notepad and write down his name. But he talks about where's the well of being in your village. And I loved that analogy. I loved that metaphor that in the midst of our community, we have a well that we can dip into, that from which we can draw the sustenance, the nourishment, and the hydration that's needed to sustain life, to sustain living. So again, the question is, what are each and every one of us going to do? Now, I'm obviously leading up to the idea that, I'm going to present to you some tips about what might help. Now, obviously, much of that is going to be about you as an individual and what you can do for yourself. But if you're taking care of yourself, right, you're going to be in a much better space to begin to care and nurture others. It's always the same equation, isn't it? If you look after yourself, you're going to be able to be there for others. If you don't, you might be able to be there for a very short period of time, but then things will change, things will stop, and you will burn out. So the first thing that I want to place into the forum here is that, okay, what are the general things in your life that are going to create stress? Now, one of the first things that comes to my mind around this period of time, and I'm a bit sheltered in a way because my wife has a tendency to take care of a lot of the practical things around Christmas because unfortunately or fortunately as a psychologist, this period of time represents an extraordinarily busy one for me at work. So I don't get much of an opportunity to go out there and participate in the shopping frenzy and so on. Not that I'm really keen to do that in the first place, but there's certain elements of it where I do like to be involved. So the key thing that I'm getting to, and in this instance, is that most of us are going to wind up being busier and busier and busier. And so what's the antidote for that in a way? You can't just stop. That's not really feasible. So the comment that I'll make around this is it's really useful to stick to your routines as much as possible and see how you can leverage possibly technology, possibly distance, in getting the things that you need to get done. Shopping for gifts, shopping for food, all those sort of things. That sort of frenzy we seem to get into, just prior to Christmas or prior to the holidays. And I think that we can, be a little thoughtful about how we're going to do that in a way that doesn't kill us. Because all I keep hearing a lot of the time is how busy we are, rather than stopping and taking a breath and reflecting. And one way of doing that is just having some connection with our normal routines, with our normal structure. So that's one aspect of it. The second thing that I want to sort of talk about in this space is be realistic about what the holidays are. Now, it's really interesting. I work with a lot of people who they have certain challenges in their families. There might be conflicts between brother and sister or mothers and fathers or whatever. But they're often extraordinarily optimistic and for some reason romanticize this period of the year with for some reason or another, they want to believe that this year is going to be different. This year is going to be a bit like a Disney movie, and everyone's just going to get on fabulously. And, Uncle George isn't going to get drunk and try to deck the father-in-law and all that sort of thing. It's going to be perfect. Don't be a perfectionist. It just leads to pain. Be realistic. Accept that, if there are family issues, that they're going to be there, and hopefully everyone's going to be on, not necessarily their best behaviour, but on better behaviour. And so that leads me to the third point, which is that create some boundaries for yourself. Create some sense of being able to go, right now, I need just some space. So if you're at a really, really busy family party, sometimes 5-10 minutes being on your own in the backyard, or, just taking yourself out of the hustle and bustle and just catch a breath. Regroup, center yourself, and then come back into the fray. It makes a lot of difference. I have personal experience of that. I'm an only child. I grew up in a very, very quiet household in many respects. So, getting married and having a large extended family and, all the stuff that goes with it. It was wonderful on the one hand, but a lot of times it got so busy I just needed a breather. I often make the joke that I married into a Cecil B. DeMille production. Boisterous, noisy, loving, warm, but as I said, as an only child, there's often only so much you can take of the good stuff, let alone if the bad stuff happens, you want to sort of, disappear in a puff of smoke. That ain't going to happen. So the point that I'm making is create a point where you regroup and ground yourself, even in the midst of it all. Right? Really, really important. The other part of it that goes with sticking to your routine and so on is the capacity to say no. As much as it is a time for celebration and gathering, you can't do everything at the same time. You need to be able to go, yes, I can do this, yes, I can do that, but no, I can't do this. And that's okay. And yes, some people might get their nose out of joint a little bit, but, you've got to take a step back and go, well, I'm trying to do my best. And if that's not good enough, that's not my fault. That's someone else's issue. So boundaries become really, really important in this whole process. The other thing, and this is where Stoicism really comes into the fore in a way, is, be reality-based, like I said before, but also be flexible and adaptable. Things can go wrong. Usually, it can often start with technology, like the oven suddenly decides to pack it in, or the car has a flat battery, whatever. You need to be flexible enough. Give yourself the flexibility to just roll with it. Don't get head up about it. In Stoicism, the idea is come from your values, your character, and not your emotions, because emotions at this time of year can run hot. Things aren't delivered, things break down. So-and-so is throwing a spanner in the works because they're bringing a new person into the group. That's stressful. So flexibility at this point in time is going to lead to adapting to the changes in circumstances a lot more. Because remember, for a lot of us, we haven't really socialised for quite a while. So for some of us, suddenly being social again produces anxiety. So you need to find a way in which you can reduce that anxiety, and being kind to yourself in that space is a really, really good way of offsetting the stress. But that also means being kind to yourself by taking time out, being kind to yourself by saying no, being kind to yourself by just putting your feet up for a bit. in between